Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Today I would like to talk about a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, an image which you will see here. Um, as I've said in the past, I try and match the book cover to the one I have in the image behind me. That took some doing. But I'll get to that in a minute, I guess. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis is a very old book. C.S. Lewis was a contemporary of J.R.R. Tolkien. They both knew each other, had a on and off in a friendship. They did have some contentions, but they were contemporaries who knew each other and spoke to each other. And their books have some similarities. This is the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia. I am going to do some spoilers, which I don't normally do, but I think it would be better for me to talk about the book if maybe I did give a bit more details of the story. The story concerns the four Pevins children. I can never pronounce their last name right. Pevins, whatever. Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy in order of age. Peter being the oldest, Lucy being the youngest. They are sent to live in the countryside by their mother during the Blitz of World War II. They are sent to live with a man who's only referred to as the professor, who they don't initially meet. All they meet is his housekeeper, who is very, very strict and warns them to never, ever disturb the professor or there will be dire consequences. So the children live in fear of being discovered and seen by the professor. But they're also all alone in the countryside with no kids around, nothing to do. They had to leave all their possessions back in London because they were fleeing the bombing of the Blitz. One day, they're playing hide and seek. Lucy discovers a room with an old wardrobe in it, and she decides to hide in there. And as she goes deeper and deeper amongst the coats and clothes, she discovers she's in, a winter forest. The portal has the wardrobe has opened up a portal to another world. She encounters a faun, or a satyr, whoever he's called the faun. Remembers the old satyrs from Greek mythology, and goes back to his house for tea, visits him for a couple of hours, leaves, goes back to her family, saying, "I've been gone for hours and hours." And they say, "You've haven't been gone at all. It's only been a minute since we started playing hide and go seek." When she tries to show them the wardrobe and the magical force behind it, it's just a wardrobe. Later on, her brother Edmund follows her into the wardrobe. He discovers the magical forest. But when she tries to get him to tell the other kids what they've seen, he denies it and says it was just a game they were playing and that Lucy was just pretending. They do eventually all four get in the wardrobe. All four discover the magical land, which is called Narnia, which is stuck in a perpetual winter thanks to the White Queen. And Edmund, being the jerk that he is winds up being recruited by the White Queen to find the other three children, because there's a prophecy that she will lose her power when four human children sit on the thrones of Cair Paravel, the ancient castle. So she plans to find the children and kill them. They do eventually break the eternal winter that the White Queen has held the land of Narnia in. Aslan, who is basically this magical lion who is basically a Jesus allegory, the lion among the lambs kind of thing. There is a final battle. The White Queen is overthrown. The kids are crowned the kings and queens of Narnia. They live there for years, becoming adults. They eventually accidentally stumble back where they came from and back through the wardrobe, reverting back to young children. That's the story in a nutshell. I skipped over a lot of things, but that is pretty much the story summary. This is a book for children. It even says so in the beginning. C.S. Lewis writes the dedication My dear Lucy, I wrote the story for you, blah, blah, blah. Your affectionate godfather. So he basically named the character of Lucy after his godniece, his goddaughter, godniece, whatever. So it shows its age. I mean, C.S. Lewis fought in World War I. So, I mean, yes, he lived to live in the 70s. He was still alive in the 60s and 70s, which is when I would have read this book. But yeah, the story very much shows its age. It is very much written in a style of someone who was writing in the 1940s and 50s when he wrote this book. It is also written for a younger audience, so the language is very simple. The storyline is fairly basic. The plot isn't very deep. It's also less than 200 pages. I think it's less than 190. The grand total is 186 pages. So it's a very thin book, which, if it's a children's story written in the I don't remember. Does it say when it was written? Copyright 1950. So that's when this was first printed. It was 1950. It was written probably in the mid to late 40s before it was finally printed. I'd have to say this book is geared more towards kids between the ages of 7 and 10. So probably a book that parents would read to their children, not something they would read themselves, for the most part. I think I'm the exception to that rule for a lot of things, but in spite of the fact that I do think it doesn't necessarily hold up as well as some other books written in the era, I do still think it holds up. I still think it is well written. C.S. Lewis has a very particular style of writing, which is fairly simplistic. There are a few. He does manage to convey some deeper thoughts and deeper writing with some very simplistic language, which I find impressive. It's not not massively throughout the entire book, but there are moments where you realize that this is actually fairly well written, despite the fact of the age in which it was, the era in which it was written, and the age of the people that C.S. Lewis was writing for. But I do love this book. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it here was that this is the first book I ever read. This first novel I ever read by myself. I was 7 years old. And when I say this is the first book I ever read, I mean this is the actual book. This is the book from 1970s. You can tell it's yellowed, stained, dog-eared, bent. I've had this book since the early 1970s. It's got it was actually my older sister's book. It's got her name written in my mother's handwriting in the upper corner. Is that my mother's handwriting? I think so. No, it's too messy. It's my older sister's handwriting. There's even, my mother had some address labels printed up for her, some customized address labels. That's got her first initial, last name. There's some nice illustrations in here. As you would expect in children's books, little illustrations at the beginning of the chapter. But I read this book when I was 7 years old, by myself. And this is the book that started all of this massive book collection here. I am a book hoarder. I keep most of my books. I've purged very few. This is what started me reading and book hoarding. I've read this book so many times over the years. As a kid without lots of money, I did wind up rereading a lot of my books. I have read this book probably 20 times, if not more. Growing up, the only hippie kid in the town of Redneck Fisherman, especially in mid-coast Maine, where there were not a lot of kids that lived nearby that I could even reach to play without getting my parents to drive me there. Maine winters are long, not always a lot to do. reading was my refuge. And I have this old, decrepit, battered book to thank for it. So I will always love this book. I did try introducing it to my children, but they never seemed to get into it, to my dismay. But, you know, people's tastes are different. I'm not trying to recommend adults read this book unless you have children. I would recommend reading this book if you have children. It's a good book. Like I said, it's short. You can read a chapter a night for the kids, spread it out over a week or two, see if they're interested. If you have young kids between the ages of 7 and 10 and they read for themselves, I would also recommend it. Because again, it's not complicated, but still has some depth to it. And I cannot rate this book highly enough. So, as always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.